Today's social media segment is brought to you by Terrebonne General Health System. Your health is our legacy. Rouse's, you're either local or you're not. Buick, the craft of modern luxury. St. Martin and Bork, know your rights.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Bayou Time. I'm your host, Keith Weissite, licensed clinical social worker with Terrebonne Home Care. Very glad you're joining us. However you may be joining us, we appreciate it. And, you know, I want you to know that very often our local sheriff's office and our local law enforcement spend hours and hours and hours, and sometimes they spend years making sure that justice is served. We're very glad to welcome into the program Sheriff Craig Weber from Lafourche Parish Sheriff's Office. Thanks so much for joining us, Sheriff.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm certainly happy to share what is a positive development in an old case from the 1980s.
Yeah, it's really, really unique, and it's only because of the hard work and the dedication and the continued efforts, along with some better analysis to allow us to be able to do this. But very, very glad. You're right. This is good news to be able to bring a culmination to the end of this case.
So back in August of 1986, Paula Boudreaux had attended an event that was referred to as the Bull Club Festival. And really, it coincided with the beginning of the August shrimp season, and they had the blessing of the fleet. So all of the shrimp boats would be decorated, and there would be a boat parade down Bayou Lafourche in the Golden Meadow area, and the priest would come out, and there would be a blessing, hopefully for a safe and productive season. That would have been August 3rd of 86. She went missing the last time she was seen. And she was reported to the Golden Meadow Police Department 3 days later on August the 6th of 1986. I guess as we look back on the case, and over the course of time, nearly 30 years, 28 years since she went missing, there have been other attempts to look into this case. But the one element that we never had until recently were her remains, to be able to find the body, the proof that she had been murdered or she was deceased. And that came about in 2022, 2 years ago. Her body was actually discovered near Slidell in 1989, 3 years later. But back in the 80s, you know, DNA and sharing of information between law enforcement agencies, technology was not what it is today. And so consequently, the St. Tammany Parish Sheriff's Office discovers the remains of a female in a swampy area near Slidell, and she's a Jane Doe. There's no identification on the body. There's nothing to suggest who this might be. So they keep the remains from 1989, and then sometime in 2022, I'm assuming, the coroner decided to send the parts of the remains to the FACES lab, FACES, which is an acronym, and I'll just tell you what it stands for: Forensic Anthropology and Computer Enhancement Services. The long and the short of it is, you've probably seen this before. It's been done on television series and other programs where you take a skull, and I guess based upon shapes of the skull and the bone, they can create what they think the person would have looked like when they were alive. And that was done. Once they had a rendition of what they thought she might have looked like, a relative was looking and said, "Hey, I think this is Paula Boudreaux. This looks like a lot like Paula Boudreaux, the lady who went missing." So we were contacted by St. Tammany, and we were able to locate family members. Paula has a son, Eric, and she has a sister, a living sister, Lillian, and they both were forthright and provided DNA samples. And then with their DNA samples compared to the DNA that was found on the remains, we finally had a positive identification, and it was no doubt that Paula was deceased and had been deceased for quite a long time. So we really put a lot of vigor in working this case, going back to all of the old case files, researching everything that we possibly could, looking for witnesses who were interviewed then to be re-interviewed, finding new leads, and actually, to some degree, doing some forensics. part of the forensics are still being analyzed. For example, we went back to the house. There was a house in Golden Meadow, which was severely damaged by Hurricane Ida. And if it hadn't been torn down, we suspect that it'll be torn down. But we went in with luminol and low light, there were proper lighting conditions, and we recovered what could be, we can't confirm, but what could be blood that would have been on the floor in the kitchen and the bathroom. Now, this is an old house, and it could have been everything from, cleaning a chicken and bleeding on the floor, or someone cutting themselves while shaving. But in any event, that evidence is currently at St. Tammany, where they're looking to try to identify if it's in fact blood and see if there's enough material to get a DNA match. We're also, with the cooperation of St. Tammany, they've done an outstanding job. They're meticulously going through all of the remains that are in their possession, all of the items that were recovered back in 1989 and held in their evidence for all of these years. We felt like, from the statements that we had read, from the people that we had talked to, from the information, it was almost the worst kept secret in South Lafourche, probably during the 80s, that Russell Lee and Judith, she's a Wisner now, but at the time they were married, Judith Lee, were involved in the killing of Paula Boudreaux and the disposal of her body. What was widely believed, and what seems to be the consensus among all of the people that we've spoken to and the statements that we've collected, is that while they were married, Russell and Judy were married, Russell was having an affair with Paula, and that Judy discovered this and became very upset and jealous and enraged about it, which resulted in Judith, in all likelihood, the belief is that Judith would have killed Paula.
Yeah. Sheriff, do you mind if I interrupt just for a second? We're going to take a short break, if that's okay.
Oh, sure.
We certainly want to continue this, but we certainly appreciate your time and updates with this. We're going to take a short break and come right back with a whole lot more about this cold case. Don't go anywhere. Bayou Time returns in just a moment.
Summer's heating up, and so are the deals at AJ Doman Chevrolet, where you get a 2024 Silverado Crew Cab for $38,990 with your 2010 or newer trade. Don't miss out on these great deals happening now at AJ Doman Chevrolet. Let our friendly staff help you with your next new or used car purchase here at AJ Doman Chevrolet at the foot of the Morgan City Bridge in Berwick.
Hello and welcome back to this edition of Bayou Time. We thank you so much. I'm your host, Keith Whiteside, licensed clinical social worker with Terrebonne Home Care. Very glad to be talking with the sheriff down in Lafourche Parish Sheriff's Office, Craig Weber. Sheriff, thank you so much for joining us once again.
Well, I'll tell you, this is, I guess, as I mentioned in the outset, a really great day for the family of Paula Boudreaux, to know that she can be laid to rest, and that the person or persons responsible for her death or in police custody.
Right. And as you were, as you were mentioning, we were talking about how this relationship may have been connected with Russell Lee and Judith Lee Weiser.
Correct. So Judith and Russell were married. Russell allegedly was involved romantically with Paula, and allegedly Judith became upset, enraged by that, made statements to people that she was going to take care of Paula. And it is believed that Paula would have been killed in a house in Golden Meadow, not far from where she actually lived. At some point, the remains were transported by Russell and or Judith to the area in Slidell. We do know that Judith had some family connections or some familiarity with that area where the body was. It was in a kind of a grassy, swampy area, and it was discovered sometime later by, I think, some hunters after it had been largely decomposed and probably much of it consumed by, animal and wildlife. At some point, they split up, and currently, Russell was living in Missouri, and Judith was living in Kentucky. After our detectives had scoured through the case file, had re-interviewed people, had submitted new evidence for further testing, about 6 months ago or so, they actually traveled to Missouri. They interviewed Russell. Now, Russell had been interviewed by an investigator back in the 80s. And in that interview, he implicated Judy at that time. But they went back, re-interviewed Russell. He did not give a confession or confirm that he and Judy were involved. And then they went to to Tennessee, where Judy lives, and they interviewed her. Then they returned back to Louisiana, worked some more on the case, and then we finally got to the point where we literally have exhausted all investigative leads that we have at this time. And when I say at this time, I think with the arrest and with the publicizing of the arrest, which I appreciate what you're doing, and what the other media outlets are doing, bringing this back to the forefront. Oftentimes, there'll be people who will come forward or may come forward and share further information that we could continue the investigation to try to solidify the case. But we took the entire case file. We took everything from the statements, from the relationships, from incidents happened afterwards, and presented a affidavit to the court for an arrest warrant. The court reviewed the affidavit and agreed that there was probable cause that these two people were responsible for the death of Paula Boudreaux, and warrants were issued. The bond for each of them is $1.1 million. Our detectives traveled up to Missouri. They left on Sunday, and then on Monday, they went to Lee's residence with the assistance of the Mountain Grove Police Department, took him into custody and processed him there on the charges and re-interviewed him. That was, again, an interview where he is still not obviously confessing at this point, but certainly is aware of Paula and was in Golden Meadow at that time, and the timeline is pretty consistent and pretty solid. After he was booked, they then traveled to Tennessee, where they did the same thing with Judith. They took her into custody and booked her as well. So we're now waiting to have them brought to Thibodeau. Russell has waived extradition, so we're coordinating his transport from Missouri back to Thibodeau, where he'll be processed and held in the Lafourche Parish Correctional Complex until he either posts bond or the case is adjudicated. Judith may or may not waive extradition. I don't have a clear answer at this point. Assuming that she does not, then we'll make arrangements for her to be brought in and booked as well. And if she does, then we'll have to go through an extradition process. But it's more of a formality. Then it'll just take a little bit longer.
Well, Sheriff, I got to tell you, as we conclude this segment, I am so very excited to be able to report, and something I brag about all the time with Brennan, with law enforcement here. You guys work so well together with other agencies, in this case, St. Tammany, and also with Cumberland and with Mountain Grove, really being able to coordinate and being able to look back on a cold case from 1986 and really be able to use the technology that we have available today to be able to bring to justice someone who was murdered on August 3rd of 1986. It is remarkable that we're able and capable to do that with you guys working so well together.
We wish we could solve every case, and sometimes cases get solved and the people who are responsible or they themselves deceased, but at least those questions get answered that linger in the minds of people who survive all these years later, and friends, relatives, and loved ones. So I appreciate the cooperation and the many advances that have been made in technology as well as in digital evidence that does permit these cases to be resurrected and come to resolution.
Well, I'm very excited for her son and her sister, those people that were able to participate with you in bringing more information and DNA, and hopefully we'll have a close to this case here soon. Sheriff, we thank you for your time, and we look forward to the results of this case as it culminates.
Thank you very much.
We appreciate it. All right, guys, that will do it for this particular segment, but don't go anywhere. A whole lot more Bayou time when we continue.
Today's social media segment is brought to you by Terrebonne General Health System. Your health is our legacy. Rouse's, you're either local or you're not. Buick, the craft of modern luxury. St. Martin and Bork, know your rights.